At this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And I'd also like to remind everyone that this meeting is video, voice recorded, and live streamed from the hdsb.ca website. I would also like and ask that you turn off any devices to silent mode at this time.
Good evening. We'll begin the meeting with acknowledging the land. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in its history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us. Thank you.
I'd like to call for the approval of the agenda. Margot, seconded by Melissa. All in favour? Thank you. Approved. I'd also like to call for the approval of the November 5th minutes. Sophia and Melissa, thank you. We are now moving on to 2.0 and the accessibility status report.
Sorry, I'll do a quick introduction. So we are fortunate to have Mary Marshall, who is our assistant principal. I mucked this up, of equity and student health. Thank you. And Sari Taha, who's the general manager of human resources, come to do this report for us tonight and hear any input from SEAC. All yours.
Good evening, and it's our pleasure to be here. I apologize in advance. My voice is a little bit stuffed up. As Mark indicated, my name is Sari Taha. I'm the General Manager of Human Resources, and with me is Mary Marshall, who is the Assistant Principal for Equity and Inclusive Education and Student Health. Quickly, my role, I am also the one of the chairs. We are the co-chairs of the AODA Coordinating Committee, and we're providing you with a status update today on the work that's been done since January 2018. But before that, quickly in terms of my role, I'm again the General Manager of Human Resources. I have many responsibilities, primarily the labor function of the school board, and I'm also responsible for workplace investigations and harassment and discrimination. And so the work I do intersects directly with the AODA work, and it's very important work that we do, and we're proud of the accomplishments that we have achieved today. So thank you. Quickly, just by way of context and background, the AODA legislation that was introduced in 2013 mandates that school boards create a multi-year plan, accessibility multi-year plan. It's a 5-year plan that we've introduced in 2017, 2022, excuse me. Thank you. And I just need some water. Yeah. Sorry. No, I'm good. I've just been talking all day with QP. So again, the AODA legislation that was introduced in 2013 requires that publicly funded public sector organizations establish a a multi-year plan, usually a 5-year plan, by which this organization identifies the actions, the steps that they will take that would allow this organization to meet the requirements under the AODA legislation. And ultimately, the AODA legislation exists to remove any barriers for Ontarians with disabilities in a variety of areas, including accessibility to buildings, physical buildings. Thank you. Thanks, Mary. Including accessibility to physical buildings, barriers in employment, be in systems, structures, or policies or procedures, barriers in transportation, barriers in communication, and any attitudinal barriers that an organization may have. And that is what the plan exists for the HDSP. It's to align its actions and its commitment with what the legislation requires. Also under that plan and under the authority of the Director of Education, the AODA Coordinating Committee was established. And this committee is responsible, again, to monitor and ensure that the actions that we've committed to, as set out in the plan, are actually taking effect year by year. And there's a status report that we provide to a variety of stakeholders, including Administrative Council, the Board of Trustees, and SEAC, of the actions taken to date with respect to our plan that we've committed to, which is the 5-year plan. So this is really what we're here for, is to give you a quick overview of what we have done since January of 2018. And the reason we weren't able to present to the committee in 2018, 2019 is, again, it was a timing issue in terms of the SEAC committee and some of the membership and some of the establishment of the committee membership. It didn't happen in time for us to make that presentation so we're giving you 18 months worth of action versus the traditional 12-month worth of action. This slide gives you a quick overview of the main buckets of action items that we have taken to date, as set out in our 5-year plan and as captured in our status report, the 2018-2019 status report. And they focus on 4 key areas. We'll call the first area the general actions taken. And that really speaks to policies and procedures that we've introduced, training that we've mandated our staff to take at all levels, admin, educators, support workers, corporate staff, and also some actions that we have taken that are school-based or education-based, students-focused. The other 3 buckets or categories of action are under information and communication. So we'll provide an overview of the things that we have done in relation to how we communicate and how we disseminate information to the public or to our employees, as well as actions in relation to employment, again, eliminating any employment barriers. And finally, the built environment, and that is the physical structures of our buildings and our schools. So in terms of policies and admin procedures, there are 3 key sources of authority, or 3 documents that really guide what we do. Again, the first document is the Accessibility Planning Administrative Procedure. And really that administrative procedure sets out the structures that exist, i.e. the AODA Coordinating Committee, which Mary and I are the co-chairs of. And that document really sets out and articulates what the expectations are of the committee, what the representation of that committee looks like, and Trustee Joanne Oliver is a member of the committee, as well as Ms. Morris and others in the room. So that basically is the main operational and transactional sort of structure that exists that allows us to meet our obligations under AODA. The second document that it's either been introduced or revised or amended is the Accessibility Standards for Customer Service. And really it's an AP that exists to meet our obligation under the legislation and the regulation, the Accessibility Standards for Customer Service regulation. And it speaks to the methods and ways and approaches by which we monitor and collect and respond to feedback from community stakeholders or internal individuals in our board, how we notify the public or internal stakeholders of any disruption of services. Again, raise awareness for our staff and the public as to the norms and the protocols and how we engage with each other if the use of a service animal is required by somebody visiting our public buildings, or someone's requiring a support person, or someone requiring assistive devices. So all of these this administrative procedure lumps all of these standards for customer service provisions into one AP and speaks to each of them individually. And lastly is a technology AP, and that is how school staff and student websites ought to look like, how they can be AODA compliant, and how we ensure that they are accessible to all of Ontarians, internal and external stakeholders. The second bucket that I alluded to in the two previous slides is training. Again, we are obligated required under the law, the AODA legislation, to provide training, mandatory training to all of our staff. There are two different sets of training that we are required by law to provide. The first one is what we call the Ontario Human Rights Code and AODA Working Together training. It's a 5-module online training program that highlights the intersection between the Human Rights Code and the AODA legislation, that the duty to accommodate, the duty to eliminate barriers for all Ontarians regardless of their limitations, restrictions is the law of the land. And that training raises awareness and underscores that responsibility and obligation for staff, for school boards, and also for the public. So that training is required for all staff. It's a 3-year cycle. Every 3 years, there's a notification that goes out to all employees that this training is required, or you need to refresh yourself with the information that is captured in that training. The other element of training is for educators only. So if you happen to be in a school-based position or a school-based function, so it's not specific to individuals who work on the corporate side, it's called accessibility training for educators. And again, it's training for school-based staff or new employees. And it's a message from Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, former Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. And then I'll pass it over to Mary.
Thanks, Sari. So in addition to the training that Sari has just outlined regarding the requirements for all of our HDSB employees and the ADOA, the educator responsibilities for accommodating students was outlined in the other training piece. Additional training sessions are also offered throughout the year to build inclusive spaces for students and staff by working to remove attitudinal barriers, and these have been listed in the report that was shared with you earlier. I won't go into detail with a number of those. The Student Services Department also facilitates a number of learning sessions for HDSB staff throughout the year. These training sessions included a number of topics as outlined on this slide, all intended to allow all of our students to achieve to the best of their potential. Beyond these larger professional development sessions, teams worked closely with school-based staff to build the capacity of educators to support students with specific assistive technology and accommodation needs in order to ensure access to learning for all of our students. Moving into the next bucket, as Sari has referred to them, information and communication. Much of the work in this area over the past 18 months has been in the transition of school websites from Google Sites to the new G Suites template. This work has involved piloting a scanning tool to better ensure compliance with AODA standards for the formatting of our websites, as well as developing a process for monitoring those sites and resolving errors that occur. This fall, school teams were trained and subsequently redesigned their school websites using the AODA compliant template designed by the Communications Department and the Information Technology team. The transition over to activating these sites is now underway, and school sites are coming on board regularly. You can see two examples of the new site here that are AODA compliant and will be monitored in an ongoing way in order to ensure access for everyone. I'm going to talk about Sari's bucket now. When we think about employment standards as laid out in AODA, there are a number of areas that are outlined with supports on both the public-facing side, hdsb.ca, and myhdsb.ca, the internal site. In accordance with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, the Halton District School Board strives to ensure that all recruiting practices are non-discriminatory and barrier-free. The HDSB external website currently highlights the process to accommodations on the inclusive recruitment and hiring page. If required, applicants may contact staffing and recruiting team in advance of scheduled interviews or scheduled testing to ensure access to the necessary accommodations. Additionally, all job postings now include wording that indicate upon request we will make reasonable interview and employment accommodations during the selection process based on any of the human rights protected grounds. Through the support of the Health and Wellness Department, ongoing support for employees is provided for all with disabilities, including accommodations on both a temporary or a permanent basis. During the 2018-2019 school year, the facilities service team created and implemented a protocol for board sites to use in communicating with the public when barrier-free elements were unavailable. In addition to resolving the restrictions to access, the protocol involves schools communicating this information to their individual community, as well as posting signage at the site, while facility services staff communicate with community members renting HDSB facilities for after-hour events. Barrier-free projects completed during the 2018-2019 school year included washrooms at Harrison Public School, as well as the installation of elevators at Brookdale, Clarksdale, Frontenac, John T. Tuck, and Rolling Meadows Public Schools.
So, you know, we spent the last few minutes giving you a quick overview of some of the key actions or accomplishments that we have done over the last 18 months. The committee, the AODA Coordinating Committee is a complex one and comprised of various functional areas of the board: IT, transportation, communications, HR, facility services, school program, and others. So many other things probably we've failed to mention, but we hope that we've captured the key highlights for the 1920 school year. Again, 5 bullets up on the board that speak to, again, some of the work that's been undertaken in 1920 by various functional areas, various departments of the board and other stakeholders. You'll see first bullet, the complete migration of school websites to the HDSB G Suite template. What that means is standardization and the same look and feel for all of our websites, school-based and corporate-based. Enhancing the accessibility landing page on hdsb.ca and that experience that the visitor will experience once they land on that page. Finalizing a library-related AODA documentation in HDSB libraries and knowledge bases and share with school library staff. Again, building that knowledge base. And with respect to, one of the key tenets of the Act, and that is physical accessibility of buildings. We're updating, under the leadership of Superintendent Puccetti, the building inventory to date, identifying school accessibility features of all school and buildings and how they rank, good or bad, or where we're at in those enhancements. Including elevator installations for Burlington Central that's set to be completed in 2020 of the spring, as well as at Nelson High School, and with the movement of the CPP program to the fall of 2020. So those are the key things that we're happy to share with you. Again, I apologize for my voice and my nose, and we're happy to answer any questions. Sorry.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
don't know if this is the right time to bring up this question. Just as a parent of a student entering the CPP program in fall of 2020, just to say there's a big discrepancy in terms of the websites of the schools that offer CPP programming. On many of the websites, there's no mention of the CPP program. And that's concerning as a parent, not being able to access that information. It's not an accessibility question. I just think it's an access question. So just wondering with the new streamlining, is there going to be there's mention of the IB program and there's mention of some of the other work skill programs there, but certain websites don't mention the program. So.
Sure, we can certainly take that back for consideration. We want to ensure that all of our programs have the same level of visibility and promotion on all of our sites. So we'll take that back. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for being here tonight.
Good evening, everyone. We have a full agenda tonight, so we're going to move on with the Nelson High School Outdoor Classroom. So joining me at the presentation table here tonight is Mike Wildfong, whose title is Manager of Capital Projects, and Sean Marks, Assistant Principal in Student Services. So I think we have a slideshow coming up. This one off. Very good. Thank you. Oh, there we go. Okay, so if you recall, Melissa brought this to our attention at our last meeting, and there was agreement that we would have a presentation and discussion at our meeting tonight. And we felt that it was important that this is happening sooner than later because of the concerns that Melissa had heard. So we shared with you when we sent out the agenda materials the questions that Melissa had gathered from parents and the discussions that she had had. And so we've attempted to answer all of those questions in the presentation. So some of them are in the text, others are in the things that we're going to say verbally tonight. So that's why you have those questions in advance. We'll be able to go through those. So if we could run through the presentation first, and I think we'll answer most, if not all, of those questions during that time. And then if there are other questions, or if you'd like to sort of dig a bit deeper and go into those a bit, we certainly can. And to know that, as with all of our topics and discussions here, if there are other questions that people have afterwards, whether they be SEAC members or other members of the public, you certainly can ask those, and we can have further discussions, separately away from SEAC. Those discussions go on all the time. So certainly happen to do that as well. All of the presentations tonight, if you'd like, we can share with SEAC as PDFs if that would be helpful if you want any of the slideshows, because we've got 3 of them tonight, so happy to do that. So starting with the purpose of our outdoor learning spaces. So I've started generally here to understand the purpose of those spaces at all of our schools. I have included some pictures of the Nelson space in terms of what it looks like so far in these slides as well. So to understand that our outdoor learning spaces are intended for all students, and with that, we obviously want to make them accessible so that all of our students can take advantage of them. A wide variety of activities go on there, and so that means it can support different programs, subjects, etc., And so they're designed with that in mind as well. They're not meant to be a free time space or a recess space, even though we don't have recess in high schools. They are meant to be a space where it's an extension of the inside learning that we can bring outside. A variety of groups will be using those spaces. Sometimes a whole class might come out. You might have small groups, and certainly you might have individual students that would be out there as well. And the amount of staff support depends on what activities are going on and the needs of those students. This is a site plan or site view of Nelson High School. And so currently the plans for 3 outdoor spaces that can be used for learning at Nelson. One is on the wall, work left to right. One is the Nelson track at the back of the school. It's a completely fenced in area that is currently used by students for a variety of purposes at that school, is one site. The next one in the middle, you see the top arrow. That is an interior courtyard at the school, not accessible right now. By access, I mean isn't usable right now because that's an area of renovation and addition that's going on as part of the transition of the Bateman programs coming over to Nelson. So when that's done, when that's completed, that's another outdoor space. It currently has trees and seating and some walk areas, et cetera, grass, et cetera, already in that area. That's a usable space for students and programs. And then the new space, you see the green arrow on the right, and that rectangle there is the where the new outdoor classroom has been constructed. And that corner there, if my mouse will work, yeah, this area here running down, so this area here is where the renovation will occur for the CPP program going in that area. So phase 1 of this design, some insights into who's the consultation that's occurred. Students, our staff in our department, student services involved, facilities department. We've consulted with an AODA specialist. They've provided us lots of input on a variety of our outdoor programs and outdoor spaces, and we involve landscape architects. So that's the input we've gathered. In terms of resources that we've drawn upon as well, we've talked with a landscape architect about helping us understand how to design spaces specifically for kids on the autism spectrum, because there are some real specific needs there in terms of profile and understanding those students and how to design spaces. And then we've done 2 outdoor classrooms at 2 high schools so far. We've done, I know, dozens and dozens of these at elementary schools, but really just started digging into these in high schools. And so we've learned from our M.M. Robinson space that we've worked on and the White Oaks one. We drew on that as well in terms of our design work and moving ahead with the space at Nelson. So here's a scan directly from the landscaping plan that we did for phase 1. We had done by our landscape architect, and you can see a few. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because we could spend the whole night talking about this, but you can see these are all, this is walkways. Here's, this entrance actually doesn't exist yet. That's coming when the renovation occurs. But you can see the access here coming in and various spaces. These circles are trees that are in place, and they show the circles show them the size at maturity. So obviously, if they're new plantings, they aren't there yet, but when they grow to maturity, that will be the size of them. And, sorry? Those ones are existing. These are existing, yeah. So, and then you'll see pictures of the other pieces here, but, so this is most, or is all of this constructed? Yes. Yeah, so all of this is in place right now. So that's one part, and then you see this area here in the middle. This is the next drawing. So these are elements, my fault, sorry. So these are here's a design that we have for the middle. But one of the key things we do when we have built our outdoor classrooms, in most of our, certainly in the last 5 years at least, all the outdoor classrooms that we've built in elementary and secondary schools, we've asked for the input of staff and students. And what we want to hear from them is, how are you going to use this space? We don't ask them necessarily to say, do you want this or that? Because we're going to get, as you can imagine, we'll have, if we ask 50 staff and students, we'll get 50 different ideas, right? And some will like this and others won't like that. So we don't ask that question. We ask, how do you want to use this space from a teaching and a learning standpoint? That's the questions that we ask, and we get great input. If you go around to our outdoor classrooms, and we've actually done this with our outdoor kindergarten spaces as well, and ask those questions. And so as you go and tour any of our schools, you'll see that there are some common elements across them, but there are many different ones. And that's partly from that input, and also because we've learned as we've gone along things that are well used, really support the learning program, other elements that may not be so. And so we continue to grow and change as we design and install these as well. So that interior space has a bit of a plan, but we haven't built it yet because we want to hear that input from students and staff. And there's lots of time for that. So here's the work completed to date. And there was a question about cost as well which I've included on the side. So you can see some of the visual panels that are there. You can see the greenery in terms of tree and spaces. You can see the surfaces that are there. You know, we intentionally have a variety of visual and textural spaces there because that's the consultant advice that we've been given in terms of the needs of students, that they need a variety of visual pieces there. They also need a variety of textures that supports their growth and development and learning as well. So you can see those in these. So 15,000 on the design and 63,000 so far on the construction costs for the total of 78. Some of the programming things that can occur at a space. These are just examples because we find there are ways that we didn't anticipate that these spaces will get used, that teachers and, I'll say more broadly, educators and students are so creative and come up with ways of using outdoor spaces that we didn't anticipate, which is wonderful. But here are some of the ones as a starting point. Students that are in our CPP in the accessibility, in the employment skills level of the program, they take what we call K courses. That's why you see those courses that all the course codes that all start with a K there. And so these are some of the courses that would directly could be supported, the kinds of programming in an outdoor setting. And then below that, you see some of the outcomes and activities that students could do. So, and understanding, engaging in leisure and hobby activities, movement activities, some of the specific activities that are prescribed by our occupational and physical therapists. We can do those gross motor, fine motor kinds of things outside. And in terms of the Exploring the Environment course, there's an example there. Just once again, these are examples of the kinds of things of understanding plants, impact on society and the environment, et cetera. So many other ways that we would use these, and we do use these spaces in schools. Those are some examples that are specific to students in CPP. So the outdoor spaces, this is again specific for Nelson. Community walks are certainly part of a big part of our CPPs because we want our students being able to function well in the community, and so we support their learning and their ability to do that well. So certainly community walks is part of that. We have students in co-op as well, which we didn't include there also, but that's another opportunity to be outside for some of our students. But we do have the enclosed track at the back of the school. The interior courtyard will be available when the work is done there. and this outdoor classroom. So highlighting that there are a number of places that kids could go outside, our students. Integration with peers. So one of the things that we really want for all of our programs that we provide for students with special needs in schools is we want that integration within the whole school community. So none of our classes are intended to sit on their own. They're intended to be a part of the fabric of that school. And that happens in a variety of ways, whether it's a learning disabilities class in an elementary school, or whether it's a gifted program, or whether it's a CPP. All those, we want the students to be part of the whole school community. So an outdoor classroom is meant to support that integration as well. That happens. So here are some of the activities that can occur in an integrated set and forum. So shared reading, drama, science, physical activities, visual arts, just as some examples. So there were some questions about other outdoor classroom spaces in the questions that were shared. So I thought we should talk about all of them. So M.M. Robinson, phase 1 was completed last year. Other elements are to be added. So you'll see in the pictures that are coming that there are a number of things that have happened there, but more to come still. White Oaks, we've got some pictures of those as well. I think it's important here to know that that space was designed for the extreme needs of a specific student. It wasn't designed for we didn't design that to say, okay, this is how we want our outdoor spaces to be designed. We have a student enrolled in that school who really, really needs to be outside. That's part of that student's profile. That's how that student is supported in their group home. Spends a lot of time outside. In the elementary school, the same thing. And so that's why we built that space the way we did. It was not intended as the way we want to build our outdoor spaces. So I'm sure you can appreciate it. I can't go into more detail in terms of the privacy of that student and family, but I wanted to be clear on that. And we have then some pictures to come there. The other high schools that have a CPP are at Blakelock, Kielburger, and Georgetown. And when we decided to begin the design and installation of these spaces, we decided to go at it slowly so that we could learn as we go. So that's why we didn't go and build them all in the first year. We started at MM as part of their they were maybe an easier one to go at, to be honest. That's why we chose to go there, and then we've been growing it since then. So the intention is to provide this kind of outdoor classroom for all kids at the schools, which includes students in the CPP. So that's why you see that there. Here are pictures of the MM classroom. I apologize for the gray day, but I asked staff, hurry up, I need some pictures before the snow falls on Sunday, so these were taken on Friday. If you see down the picture on I'll use my mouse again here. This goes down, there's a butterfly garden down there, so this was intentionally, part of the plan here was that students can access down into that area and also come down into this part. There's a bit of a hill in the back, so we decided to utilize that as part of the design. And you can see there's intentionally some uneven textured spaces there for students to work on that gross motor and be able to move around there. And some elements here, some sort of balance bars and things to hang, et cetera, on. Again, some uneven textured spaces here intentionally for mobility and gross motor, et cetera, that kind of development. It can look, there's some benches back here. It can look a little bit bare, and that's because the school said we want to build some of the things in our tech programs, some of the other elements that are going to go in there. And we said, sure, that's going to help with ownership and input into the design work, sure. So we certainly want the tech programs to be building them to the right standard in terms of safety and durability and meeting the needs of our students. Again, all students. So that's why it looks a little bit bare in places. This here, even, here we have asphalt and some wood chips, but over here we have pea gravel and some elements again around balance, different visual, different textures, et cetera, that are important in meeting the needs of all students. Here are pictures of the space at White Oaks. White Oaks that has two campuses, if you're unfamiliar with that school. The North Campus, where the CPP is it's quite a tight site. The property lines are very close to the building. There's a brand new French school on the one side, property lines right against the other side of the building. At the back, you can't see it in these angles. Right behind this is a Town of Oakville baseball diamond. And so there's really no other room on the property. You know, where I showed you the choices of outdoor spaces at Nelson, those are not options at White Oaks. So this was the only place that we could build this. And so you can see a number of elements here in these designs. Again, the fence. When we've talked recently with the staff at White Oaks, it's actually not being used very much. And as you might expect, students, high school students don't necessarily want to be fenced in, right? They don't want to be treated like little kids, right? They're, many are adults in terms of age and want to be in a more free, open place. And so the White Oak staff were pretty honest with us and said, especially some of our more developed kids don't want to be in a fenced-in area. So our intention is that this will be modified when either that one specific student's needs change or is no longer attending the school. So this will look different when we get to that point. There were some specific safety questions that Melissa shared, and we wanted to make sure we answered. So most students are not, to use the language in those questions, most of our students in CPP are not flight risks. That's not the case. Some students do require a higher level of supervision than others, and that's the same as we would be sure to provide that supervision whether the student was on a community walk or in another outdoor setting. We would provide that type of supervision. Once again, emphasizing the importance of community outings because we really want to help our students grow and grow towards independence in the community. We know that that's an outcome that all families want for their students as they exit CPP. And it's important that we provide those outings and opportunities so that we can see the transference of skills as they come from what's happening in the classroom and then be able to apply that out in the community. And then finally, we want to ensure that we prepare students for those kinds of experiences. And so we provide instruction to help them to be ready for those different experiences as they move and grow in the CPP. Some other specific concerns that were shared about seating. So, this picture here that was provided, we agree. The space to put your bottom on isn't big enough, and so that back rest is going to be moved back. That's that's an adjustment that needs to be made. We intentionally don't have armrests on the side. If you look over on the picture on the right, over here, and this kind of goes to the next concern, the intention is that this is a space where a student can come to with a wheelchair or a walker or a trike, whatever that might be, and be able to stop there and then transfer over, whether they can do it on their own or with staff support, but transfer over onto a bench, which is something we want students to be able to do independently. So the intention is not to have armrests on the sides, but armrests are still coming for the middle. So in the middle of the benches is where you'll see that. Also, we want staff to be able to sit on the end of the benches and be able to support students in wheelchairs or other mobility devices. And they can't do that with an armrest there either. So that's why there are no armrests on the ends. I think these were called speed bumps in the questions, but we're using the language that our mobility consultants have helped us with, which is the high contrast curb stops. So these look like this intentionally for some of our students that have visual impairments and need to be able to see them really well. Obviously, we don't want a student who has some visual needs and either rolls or walks in that direction and can't see it. So that's why they are where they are and what they look like, and it's once again therefore to prevent the rolling of those assistive devices. These freestanding walls, they're there intentionally, not as decoration. They're there as visual blinds because some of our students benefit from that when they first come out of the door, to not, to be able to see those as a bit of a visual barrier. They're there. Also for some privacy. Some people have asked, well, why wouldn't we just put those all the way up, all the way around? Again, our students don't want to be and feel fenced in. There's a practical side of this, and we learned this with some of our kindergarten spaces. When you create spaces that are totally closed in, we draw students there at other times of the day and the week, and those spaces get used inappropriately. You can imagine what kinds of things might go on nights and weekends if it's totally enclosed. So that's intentional that they don't wrap all the way around. There were concerns expressed about splinters and insects or anything else. Certainly, like any of our spaces, we monitor them for problems, and if they arise, but we know these have been used in other spaces successfully. So if there are problems, we certainly monitor and we alter and make adjustments to our spaces as needed. In terms of, there was a question about shade. These pictures were taken, I think, midday. I think you can see there's a lot of trees out front. There's a lot of shade there. Shade comes from both the big trees that are there, and then depending on the position of the sun, also from the building, because this is right up against the building. So there is quite a bit of shade already. When we do some more work in terms of phase 2, if where we land in terms of how this space is going to be used, that we might put in a shade sail, we'll consider that for sure. And then there was a question about visibility of this space, and I thought I would just emphasize that we want this to be an inclusive space for all students, and that we want our students not only here to be integrated with others in the population, but throughout the school. We want that to be a part of all of our special classrooms operate in all schools. So this is a space for all kids again, and important there. So finally, some next steps. So I mentioned about gathering input from staff and students. We actually had planned to do some of that over the last week or so, but we're in a bit of a labor piece, as you can understand right now. We had planned to release some staff and start getting their input, but that has to be on hold for now. So that's still coming, as well as input from staff. We'll do that, from students. We'll do that for input from staff at Bateman right now, the CPP staff there, because we know many of them will follow the students, but also from the staff at Nelson, we'll get that input about how they'd like to use that space. We're here tonight to hear your input, so we welcome that, and we've heard from some others, and we'll continue to listen to that as we move forward. The final design work is coming through the winter, and then we'll finish phase 1 and work on phase 2 during the spring and summer. So I'd be happy to take any questions, and Mike and Sean are here to help me out with the things I don't know.
Okay, I have a couple questions. A couple will be offline, but there's a couple that I want to ask you here. You said, first of all, that you learned from both and White Oak's outdoor learning spaces. What were your takeaways from that? So things that maybe you could strengthen moving forward. That's question 1.
So I'll start, and if you guys have anything to add, go ahead. So at we learned about the importance of making it as accessible as possible to all students. So because we had explored a few different places. MM is a pretty big property, so we had a number of places where we could have put this, and we looked at where there are programs in the school and how many access points they have. So you can get into that outdoor space from a number of places pretty easily. So, and what we heard from the school is that that really helps them get out there, and they don't have to go through numerous hallways and floors, et cetera. So that was important. The use of it has been more at some times and less at others, and also has been where we had hoped for more from some programs, maybe hasn't necessarily happened, and yet has been a lot from some others. And as we've dug into that, we've understood that staff need support in knowing how they might use that best to support their program. Because it's not just, like I said at the beginning, it's not a place that's just a free time spot. Granted, students can go out there and just use it if they want, but from a program standpoint, it's not a free time space, nor is it a spot that isn't tied to program. So within the various courses, we're working with staff to help them better understand how their course can be enriched by bringing the learning outside. So that was an important piece there. At White Oaks, we learned about the fence, that they're not big fans of the fence, right? It's not an appeal for our kids that way. And we've heard more about the programming pieces there. You know, when we make it a real close to connection to the classroom program, it gets lots of use. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it there in terms of those parts there.
Okay, and kind of a follow-up. It's not exactly a follow-up, but kind of coming from what you were talking about. And this was one of the questions that came up in here. In certain slides there, you referred to it as the CPP outdoor learning space. And then you switch back to it's for everyone. So I think really, again, so you're looking at trying to, and I'm going to use the word include versus integrate, include all students at the school. I think that really, in my feeling would be that it is just the outdoor learning space versus the CPP outdoor learning space. I don't know if that ownership is helpful or not, but I'd like other people's opinion on that. But for me, you want to include all students in the school. Again, I think integrating that leaves a sour taste in my mouth, that word. But so when you're looking at inclusion, it's the idea that all students are going to use this space. So I think moving away from it being the CPP Outdoor Learning Center to the Outdoor Learning Center. And I think, again, that would encourage other staff from other programs to use it.
Absolutely agree. And in terms of the slides, I believe we've used the language outdoor learning classroom or space in all of them. The one where we didn't is the White Oaks one. And so that was in
phase 1 to date slide. It says CPP Outdoor Learning Center.
Thank you. So I'll make that change. Thank you. I was intentional about it being on the White Oaks one because we built it. That design, with the fence was for that student. So to your point, do we want these to be used by all students? Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so I have several questions, obviously, that from my list that everybody accessed. I'm going to go in I'm going to follow up right away with Margot's comment. In the budget, so when we talked about cost and funding, Margot mentioned accessibility, which is the first bullet. Is it accessible to everybody or just the CPP students? So first off, what I would say is, I think you're right, is that we want to have a partnership with the students of all programs in that building with the community, the CPP program. But that said, as a parent of a student that's about to go to high school who has some intellectual and physical disabilities, they can't leave property at lunch. They don't have the freedom to go walk to the mall with their friends. They don't have the freedom to go over to someone's house. They don't have that sort of independence where they, you know, when we put, you know, an adult has to put them on the bus in the morning, and EA has to take them off the bus. At some point, they need to be supervised at any point in their day. So that outdoor space for them is that little bit of freedom in a secure space that most teenagers don't get. While I believe everybody should access that program, we have to be really, you know, the intent is that we're giving them a little bit of freedom. You mentioned that they don't have recess. They do need to socialize. They do need a place that's safe, that's at school, that has, you know, many of them have medical and sort of other needs that need to be close by, but they still need to be, they still need that recess. So I'm going to speak about it a little bit later, but that's the thing I'd say is this, yes, in an ideal world, we would have all students down there all the time, but let's be really clear, for these kids, they don't have the ability to go be free somewhere else. So this is really important that they have some space where they can just be teenagers. So that's the first thing. Second thing, in terms of cost and funding, so you sort of laid that out that the design was $15,000, but also the construction specifically said construction CPP outdoor learning, $78,000. So is that a budget line? Because if the budget line specifically says CPP outdoor learning, I feel like, you know, you either have to change the name of that budget line because, you know, either it's for them or it's not. And I'm not, you know, I don't think it should be inaccessible to other students in the building, but if you're, you know, if it came from that budget line, I think we need to be really clear about who it's being built for and what it's going to give those students. So I don't know if you want to, I have more questions. So I don't know if you want to answer and then
Sure.
we'll come back to me.
Yeah. So the, you know, the questions were about where how much and where is it coming from, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why I was intentional about saying what those were. So facilities has a number of pots of money that they draw upon for a variety of purposes, and we're able to do the design work from one of those. At the board table, and I'm going to go back maybe 3 years now, I think, 2 or 3 years now, we had a reserve for some of our outdoor learning spaces that for kindergarten, that was the spaces have been completed. We had some unused funds. So at the time, we made the request of trustees to allow us to bring these dollars forward to create these types of spaces in the high schools that have a CPP. Yeah. So that's why that was the title of the report and the budget line. You know, we in that report and in that as we went ahead with that, we very quickly said we want these spaces to be for all kids. So even though that was the initial ask, you know, we quickly said, you know what, there's so much more value to include everyone in the use of these spaces. So that's why the language there, it's not the intention that it's only CPP, but, you know, the question was, where did this money come from? I thought it was important to say where. So.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the idea, is that absolutely we want to include everybody, but the specific build, you know, just even that it came from the overflow from the kindergarten room. I mean, maybe I'll discuss that right now, right? So we're talking about accessibility to all. In kindergarten, there's lots of kindergarten students that aren't flight risks, but there are some that are. And we, you know, certainly the JKs are put in the so-called kindy pen, and as they learn that sort of thing, they are allowed freedom out into the regular sort of environment. Same sort of situation is that we'll talk about its location. There's so many questions I have. We're talking about the location, but I know sitting here, right here today, there's 3 members of SEAC, and there's a member in the audience as well, that all have students with special needs. And I think it's misleading to say that most parents don't want their kids penned in. That study, I'm not sure where that study came from. I'm not sure I'm looking across at Ms. Siddiqui as well, that when you have a student that can, certainly at kindergarten age, you can pretty much catch them. At 15, 16, 17, even if you can catch them, you probably won't be able to stop them. The proximity to New Street is 20 meters. So while we talk about the White Oaks, it is tucked in. Yes, it's close to a parking lot, but it's tucked in an environment that doesn't have the same level of traffic flow within 20 meters. We would never put an outdoor space for kindergarten students. And you say, oh, there's a big difference between high school and kindergarten. But unfortunately, for some of the members of our CPP community, they're functioning at, a kindergarten intellectual level. They see a dog, something that scares them, they see something they want, they're going to run there, and they're going to run there quickly. So the location of that warrants the fence, not necessarily that we want to pen in our students, but the location so close to New Street, a very busy street in Burlington, is the need for that fence. If we're really going to say that it's accessible for everybody in that program, as well as everybody in that school, we have to make sure that it's safe first and foremost. Because what's going to happen if there's no fence there is that teachers, as you said, will feel that certain students aren't ready to go out there, and they won't go out there. Now, I don't think I was aware of the indoor space that exists there. How that's going to look and how that's going to be able to be used, I think is something. But really, for the amount of money that's been invested in this outdoor space, I'd hazard to say that if you surveyed parents, I know most parents I know of in my son's class would feel more comfortable with a fence, for sure. So that's something I think to consider, is that there'll be one person that doesn't want it, but safety should be the paramount issue when we're discussing, this group of kids. So I'll go on from that. In terms of completion, I'm obviously happy to hear that it's just phase one. I think a few weeks ago, I said to you that I think some people jumped the gun and promoted it as a fait accompli, and it was promoted all around, and I think that got a lot of people with their backs up. So obviously hearing that it's been phase one, the look of phase two looks interesting, that they're actually going to build something in that center space. It's at this point just sort of dead grass, but I'm looking forward to see what is built there. So I think that gives a lot of room, as you said, further along, that staff and students will have some input into that space on their own. So I think that's that answers that question for sure. Location. So brought it up really briefly in terms of the traffic. So was there a study done to look at the traffic flow on New Street? Not only the volume of cars, but how quickly those cars, there's a traffic light right there. So the cars are definitely stopping. It's not as thorough, but there's also a fire station just around the corner. So the amount of times that a loud piercing sound would go is a concern as well for some students with some sensory issues as well. So, if you've ever go by, it's very close to the road. So I think that's the biggest issue in terms of the fence, not so much, I see I'm out of time, but not so much the proximity to that road. What I will say about the White Oaks outdoor classroom is to have built that fence for one student and then want to take it down seems like I don't know how to feel on either side of that. I'm sure that was an essential need for that one student, but I wonder how many other students were able to use that space because it was there, as opposed to maybe not being able to go outside or having to go outside with 2 EAs as opposed to just one, or one for 3, or having that little bit of freedom that they might not get inside in terms of being that. So to say that it was just built for one student, I think it takes away from maybe, you say it's not being used. So again, I'm not sure, is that a teaching and learning issue? But I know outdoor space is really important, and for them, they still they need recess. They need to be outside, and they can't necessarily, as we said, take off for their lunch break and go down to the mall and go get something at Sobeys. So being able to get outside during the day, I think, is really important, that recess piece. Anybody else have any questions? I don't know.
Can I make a couple comments? So first off, that it's important that we're hearing your input. So, you've heard that this isn't a done deal. It's not finished. And, every SEAC meeting, we're bringing you, at least one, if not several, topics or items that we need to hear your input on. So I appreciate hearing this tonight. And so we hear your concerns around safety around the fence. So we'll take that back and consider that. The White Oaks space is a good example of how on the one side, I hear your points about, is this safer because of it being fenced in? And, to one of the points I made earlier, we provide a wide variety of opportunities for our kids to be outside. More of them are not in fenced environments, whether they be community walks or co-op programs or going to swimming pools or a variety of things where they are not fenced. And so we want to help our students be successful in those environments, and that's what comes through instruction. So just to understand that piece, right? And that space at White Oaks is used by the students in the CPP a little bit. The staff say it's not used by any of the other students because the White Oaks North Campus also has a couple hundred other students in other programs there. They aren't using it at all. And the feedback we've heard is they're older students who don't want to be in that fenced environment. So when we think about these as being an outdoor classroom and space for all kids, that's part of that inclusion, right? That we provide that so that it meets the needs of the type of environment that all kids want to be in.
So just I'll be honest, when these pictures did spread, I represent the Down syndrome community. So I had a lot of parents emailing me and quite upset. And so that stat really jumped out at me, the one where it said, most of the kids in CPP are not flight risks. Is that based on statistics, data? What's that based on?
That's based on us knowing our student population. So where we have, our CPPs are, typically, they say 10 to 12 students. I couldn't give you a number per class, but you have to remember we have a range of students in those classes, right? From students with developmental disabilities to students with mild intellectual disabilities, right? And the range that runs through. So for the folks here that don't know, there are students in our CPPs who you might say, okay, I can visually see why that student needs that type of supported environment, whether it might be their physical needs or their behavior, communication, whichever. There are other students, many in our CPPs who, if you were to walk up and talk to them, you wouldn't know that, right? Visually or whichever else.
For sure, yeah.
And so that range of students, that term flight risk doesn't apply to lots and lots of them. Actual numbers piece, it's also about their development. You might say, wow, that student is I don't even like the term flight risk, but if we're using it tonight, they might be at that moment in time, but as we help them grow and develop, are no longer, right?
For sure, and that's ideal. We want to work towards that. But just having spoken with a couple of moms that have kids in CPP, they have Down syndrome. A lot of them were really worried about, the proximity to the street and the high traffic. And I guess my concern is so what if you have, 2 kids in that classroom that are a flight risk, that we know that if we do send them out there, unless an EA is on them one-on-one, in a second they could be gone. So then do they not get access now? So now, everyone's going outside, we're having some, drama or doing some part.
So, yeah, great question. So as a staff, we make decisions about how to prepare students to be in a variety of spaces. If it's helped, an analogy we've kind of used in discussing this amongst ourselves is when we make decisions about taking students swimming. There are some students who are not ready at that time to go to a pool, so they don't go. And it's not about excluding them, it's about making a decision to program for them appropriately for what they're ready for. So they participate in other activities when some students might swim, those students may not go. Some students that go to the pool, most of our community pools have sort of a small pool, a wading pool, right? Sort of knee-deep type of thing. Some of our students, that's what they're ready for, and that's how they participate when they go to the pool. Some students are ready to go in the shallow end. All of these with varying levels of support. And some students are ready for the deep end.
Yeah.
So, and that can change through the course of the year and the years that they're in CPP as well. So if you take that analogy, that's the same when our kids go outside. What are they ready for? And where are they going to experience success? In all of those sort of levels of readiness or, the type of environment that they're going to be successful in, we provide instruction and practice and planning in the classroom for them to be ready to be successful in that setting. So when you think about them going outdoors into a wide variety of places, some of our students are ready for that space at Nelson right from the get-go. And they could go out there really without any support because that's how independent they are.
Right.
Others need some support.
My concern is like the many that are not quite ready right away. We also want them to be outside. I just, as an advisory committee and based on parent feedback, I would advise that perhaps we look at maybe like some sort of partial wall, a green wall. A lot of schools are doing green walls, where we have maybe some plants growing on one side or something I think that would give us some protection and, make the parents feel like we are responding to, their concerns.
And we have been talking about that. What are some other things that we could do that would provide a physical/visual barrier? Because we know for some of our students, it's the visual piece, right? That is the stimulation to move.
Right.
And that's why some of those freestanding walls are positioned where they are is intentionally to be a visual barrier when the students first go outside. So we are considering the addition of some others in response to some of the concerns.
Okay. My other question was the bench design. I got to say, when I first saw that, I was like, how many people were consulted? Experts were consulted? Like, how did that happen? That bench is like, our kids with Down syndrome tend to be on the heavier side, by the time they get to high school. And a lot of moms were emailing me saying, what? Of course, people didn't realize it was phase one. They're like, what is this? Like, my kid can't sit on this. So, we know that it costs time and money to go back and make changes and things like that. So I just wonder.
Once again, there are elements in all of our outdoor spaces that need adjustment at times, right? This is one of the ones where we looked at when, that back needs to get moved, right? So that's going to happen. In terms of the design, the seat, the log, there are, I guess, things that we look at as adults and say, or maybe as non-educators and say, why isn't it just a regular bench that's there?
No, I love the design.
Right?
Like
that there are, we know that our kids like the texture of the log, right? And and being able to see that there is, that there's layers to understanding that natural item, right? So we've heard the concerns about is it the shape not appropriate or is it too rough? It has been sanded in terms of trying to make it smooth and to not be any kind of risk to students. But again, we've heard the feedback. We're certainly going to take a look at it.
Great. Thank you.
I see we have another speaker, but I just want to remind everybody that we still have another presentation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mark, may I have an opportunity to speak? Would you mind, as a parent?
It's up to the chair.
The parents were invited to direct their questions to Melissa, and I was hoping that the questions were addressed during the presentation, but certainly questions can be answered after the meeting once we have proceeded with the agenda.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards. I don't see the need for that. We're addressing this way, so I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards.
Yeah, Mark, just a quick question. I mean, there's been a conversation about this being an inclusive space for everybody in the school system, and well, I think that's wonderful. I was just wondering how much is that actually taking place at or is it really a space for the CPP program, and therefore should it be designed purely for their needs?
Great question. So, like I said earlier, the range of use by the programs, the students, the staff at really varies. The intention may be this, and the actuality might be different. So that's where our learning comes into play about how do we make that an inclusive space. And by inclusive, I don't just mean by how it can be accessed, but is it actually being used? And so the learning for us, again, I said, is about programming. We haven't, even though it might not be used as much as we would like in the ways that we would like, that doesn't deter us from wanting to keep moving in that direction. We know that our students in any of our specialized programs, I think it's, the desire of everyone is that they are an integral part of that school community. So, we intentionally have we don't, isolate our programs from the rest of the school. We don't sort of say, here's the locked door between the, we have them moving through the school. We have them joining other programs as appropriate. They're using spaces like libraries and gyms and music rooms and all those spaces because we want that integration, because that's life after school, right? So we want that type of environment. So although it may not be necessarily used as much and as well as we would like, we're continuing to move that way as in our programming.
I guess I'm kind of not making myself clear then. In a classroom, we teach all programs in a room with 4 walls and a door, which is effectively a contained space. I'm struggling to understand why, if a teacher wants to teach outside, they cannot take their class to an enclosed space that allows it to be accessible for children who may be of flight risk and are therefore safer in an enclosed space, but can now be outside. Then why would that stop a teacher from teaching outside? The fact that they can get outside and there is a fence around when they teach inside in a classroom with 4 walls around. If that is the need of children who may be a flight risk, and therefore by setting up that space that is safe for everybody, we allow them to be outside too. I guess that's, I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but it's like children who have no other needs will still be able to access a closed-in space that is safe for everyone, whereas children who are potentially a flight risk, even if there's only 1 or 2 in the class, will be less likely to go in that space if it is not safe, and therefore the ones who really need the program will not have access to it.
I believe I understand your question. And so, and understand the perspective that you're bringing to that. The, our intentionality around that use by all students. Number one, the fence will be limiting for some because they would go beyond that. If you look at the outdoor classrooms in our elementary schools, I don't know of any of them. I'd have to think about it. I don't know of any of them that are enclosed, because many. I don't know if I'd say not all, but most of our elementary schools have, and we're doing this more and more, an outdoor classroom that looks and feels different ways, but aren't fenced in. And those are meant to be spaces that aren't limited by that geographic space, but can go beyond even that, whether it's a collection of stones or berms or whatever that might be there. They don't have a fence. And it's not, so it's to allow a more open opportunity in terms of the programming that not be limited by that space. Second, and I'll go back to some of the response I was sharing with you earlier in response to Melissa's question, is that our students, we don't want their ability to be programmed for and supported to be limited to only spaces that are enclosed, whether they be classroom walls or whether they be fences. That we're able to bring them into a variety of settings and spaces and help them be successful in those, because we know that's ultimately where we want to go. The fact that some students may not be ready to be supported in that space in that moment, I guess I appreciate that might be a concern for some parents. We're really fortunate at Nelson that we have other spaces that we can bring students to that have that enclosed environment, both that courtyard and the track. So there are other spaces to support kids there. Once again, I'm more than happy to hear other questions and have more dialogue with SEAC members and parents. I'd be happy to do that after the meeting, for sure. And if it's not tonight, then at other times.
I just have a quick question. I don't know if it'll be a quick answer, but my question is, how did you come to the decision as to where the outdoor classroom was being placed?
So we spent a long time talking about the entire Nelson site and bringing over all the programming options and supports from Bateman. And so in that full discussion, talked about various places where the CPP would be located, decided on the location where it is from a number of benefits for it to be there, and then from there talked about the value of having an outdoor learning space and its proximity to the CPP area.
We still have more speakers, but I just want to remind everyone that we still have another presentation. So I will be moving on to the next one at, I don't know, 8:35.
Yeah. No, I was just going to actually summarize and just kind of wrap it up. I think, to be honest, I think we really appreciate the time that we've been given to raise our concerns. I definitely feel that you took them seriously. We had a presentation prepared. It was just a month ago that I brought this situation up. You got lots of people here that could sort of answer some questions. And I think the most important thing is that you're open to recognizing that there still needs more thought and more time and attention. And I think Alison said it really eloquently. about the space itself. And also that, you know, it's, we talk about integration of the two schools, and we know how heated that the whole PAR review was. That's, you know, to really integrate a group of, a community of, you know, just two different schools, but also two different programs at different schools. It has to come from the students, and it has to come from the teacher directed. So the first teacher that's going to bring their class down into that space and use that space and interact with the CPP kids that are using that space, that's going to make the change. It's not the physical environment that we build. I mean, we have to build for safety, as in all of our classrooms. What's really going to integrate and really make this feel like a community is teacher directed and school directed, and encouraging teachers to get down there with their students. And, you know, even the White Oaks example, when I was there, both gates were open. So it wasn't like the students would come in and chink, you know, like a prison. It was open. But what it allowed for, in my view, was that EAs could give those students some freedom with two, you know, exits to watch if something were to agitate them. So I really appreciate all the time that you've given us. Again, anybody, if they have more questions, can email me any further questions, and I will direct them, or you can direct them yourself. So thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you. Moving on to the next topic, 2.3.
Thank you, and we're going to switch to another slideshow. Here we go. Okay. So I did foreshadow that I'd be bringing this to you at our last meeting, and so here it is. And I'll try to move through this fairly quickly. I know that the admin procedure that was shared with you is pretty long. And so hopefully you had a chance to, if not read it in depth, at least be able to scan through it into the key areas and see those over the weekend. So quickly, this is a requirement of all school boards to have an administrative procedure and a policy in place around the ability of the request for a service animal to be brought into a school by student. So that was an expectation of the ministry. Many boards, including Halton, already had a procedure in place. So we've had one in place for a number of years, not formalized as an administrative procedure. We called it a protocol. Because we had requests coming forward, so we needed a process in place that that schools could follow in terms of working with families and to determine if and how a service animal would come into the school. And we didn't formalize it as an administrative procedure because the ministry said to us, we're going to be bringing this expectation. We didn't want to write our procedure and then have to rewrite it after the ministry came up with its parameters. So that's why we kept it as a protocol that we followed, and now we've basically formalized it. And I'll start by saying what we were doing before really hasn't changed. So what you're seeing is a formalized administrative procedure, but our practice that we're doing, the ministry's parameters have lined up with what we're already doing. So this isn't going to be a significant shift of any sort in terms of our practice. So, in terms of the purpose, you can see that we need to consider, is this an appropriate accommodation to support the students' learning needs? Because we do get requests, and that's the key question that we're trying to answer when we talk this through with parents. Very much needs to be considered in a case-by-case basis because it is very much based on the individual needs of each student. And our process needs to be consistent and transparent. If you don't mind, I'll go through this again like we did the last presentation and take questions at the end. So this definition of a service animal, you can see here in the bold, right, that provides support relating to the student's disability and assists the student in accessing meaningfully accessing education. So that's a pretty important piece there. The student might have a service animal that supports other needs outside of what are being accessed and supported in the school. That's the case with some of our families. The needs that are there are being met in the school quite well and don't need the service animal to come in to do that. If the question is, what needs can't we meet or could be better met by that service animal is the question. And in all these cases, we're looking at the whole school community, because as you can imagine, there are other factors at play in terms of making these decisions, which we'll get into. I've tried to not raise the cuteness factor too much in all the pictures that I've included, but I couldn't help it because there's some great ones out there. We had to certainly respect all our obligations under all these acts and other applicable pieces here. As you can see, I'm not going to read the slides to you, but you can see the things there that we had to consider. Here are the expectations of the ministry. So our admin procedure has to include a communication plan where we tell the community about how the parents can access this process, and also the fact that there is a service animal in place in schools. And I'll point out with this picture, I couldn't tell from the pic, but we can't have any dogs in training in our schools. I know it might be tempting because the cuteness is even higher, but we can't have service animals in training, right? They have to be fully certified, capable service animals. And even though that might be really tempting. And then our process has to tell families how this is done, how they make the request, how we make our decision making, certainly timely, equitable, etc., and available, and again focused on the strengths and needs of each student. I don't know why these slides are all cut off. We have to get this projector adjusted, but health and safety concerns have to be addressed. So if there are any concerns around allergies or anxiety around animals in schools, we work through those. We've had these circumstances arise in the past. We work through those, and we want to minimize conflict, right? We don't want a clash between families or between staff and a student or a family. We really work those through, and we have these requests come every year, and we work these through. So. And then clear on our roles and responsibilities, because they are there for all students, parents, and school staff. Training, we expect obviously the service animal and the handler student to be trained, but also we provide training for staff that are in direct contact with that service animal. The ministry has stated that they're going to be reviewing what this looks like in school boards. So our policies, procedures, and also our data collection. They want us to be tracking how many requests that we get, how many of those are granted, the types of needs that are associated with those requests, et cetera. They've outlined what our data collection should be, and so that's part of what will occur. So in terms of implementation, the expectation is that we have our admin procedure available on our website by the 1st of next year, which we will. And our process going forward, or what our process has been so far, is we reviewed the ministry's program and policy memorandum. That's what a PPM is. We looked at our protocol that was already in place. The Council of Ontario Directors of Education, CODE, that association asked Miller Thompson, a legal firm, to do a draft procedure that all boards could use, because they knew, okay, this expectation, let's not have everyone sort of reinventing the wheel themselves. Let's ask a legal firm with lots of experience in this area if they would do a draft for everybody. So that's what happened, and honestly, much of what you see there fits the bill really well, so we didn't have to change much. So we took all this input together and developed what you see here. So continuing on with the cuteness factor in the pictures and our process. So you can see this was first approved by admin council, now seeking your input. Will be shared with trustees this month as well, and then land on the board's website. And the final cute picture and questions, suggestions, concerns.
All right, so I kind of asked this about coming from the board. So I was asking really, so you looked at this in terms of relating to a student's disability. So I know that at the central, I don't know if it's the central high school, central elementary school wellness fair that they had last academic year, they had St. John's ambulance service dogs in the library for students to meet and greet sort of thing. So that's kind of a little bit different because mental illness or anxiety is not necessarily seen as a disability. So I'm just asking, and I know you kind of hinted to an answer, but how does that fit into this?
Sure, thanks for that question. So the ministry's requirements are specific that the boards develop this policy, this procedure around that individual service animal, guide dog, etc. So that's what we've been expected to develop, and we have. And so any service animal coming into the school through this process is about the needs of the individual student. What you're referring to are therapy animals, and we have a number of organizations in our community, St. John's Ambulance being one of them, that provide that, I guess I'll call it service, within our communities. They come into seniors' homes and schools and a number of places like that. And so I'm not sure if all, but I know that a lot of our high schools, for example, have them come in during exam time, right? As a place where kids can kind of come and decompress and yeah. So yeah, definitely a difference between a therapy dog and a service dog. So we welcome them in also around with some expectations around how they come in and are supported, et cetera. And so we're developing, we have staff right now developing a separate protocol for what that would look like, again, because as you can imagine, again, we need to have some expectations for the level of training of those dogs and handlers, how they might be used, how to accommodate students that have other needs like allergies or anxieties, et cetera, right? So all that and the communication of what's going on still needs to occur, even though it's not a service dog. The fact that they're coming into the school still needs to be managed appropriately. So we're not discouraging that. We just want to make sure it's done right. So we're developing that protocol as well, which is separate from the ministry's request.
So that was just my question, because I know that with the protocol that you looked at with this, it was looking at the needs, like, so other students who might be allergic or those sort of things. And I just didn't know if there was the same, as I said, I know that they're just, and I am a dog lover, so I am happy to have the dogs in the school, but I just think that if you have this protocol for service animals, service dogs to come in, and therapy dogs are still dogs, I would guess that there would need to be similar expectations as far as the needs of other students, as far as fears of animals and allergies, that sort of thing.
For sure. It's just that the process and the reasons for their coming in are far different, right? The protocol where this is, what is it, 15 pages or whatever, that will be a lot shorter because the reasons for coming in and how you manage that. It's been happening, like I said, for a number of years in our schools, quite well and with success, but really it's been kind of up to each school to manage that. So the intention of us developing that protocol is to make sure that we're doing it well everywhere.
Any more questions? Okay, I'd like to thank Mark and Sean for this discussion. Thank you very much. And moving on with the agenda, we now go to 3.0, SEAC discussion and question period. Okay,
On we go.
is there none? Oh, Sophia.
Just a quick question. The Peel Board recently approved an increase in teaching assistant allocations for the 2019-2020 year. Trustees approved the use of in-year surplus funds to allocate 50 LTO TA positions in the board because we know that the need's great and there's not enough TAs. I'm just wondering if the Halton Board is going to try and do something similar to fill the gaps, given that the close proximity of Peel and Halton, I was hoping that would be ideal.
So for people that don't know, Peel calls them teaching assistants, right? TAs, we call them educational assistants, just the understanding of the acronyms. So we did increase our number of educational assistants this year by 8. I'm looking at Sean at the beginning of the year, or 9? 8. Okay, so 8 at the beginning of the year. And that number, if you're wondering how we arrived at that, was based on our population growth. So as a percentage of students growth, we increased that. So we did that already, and this year we did allocate some of our funds around increasing the size of our itinerant pool. We have a number of EAs that are allocated to schools as the allocation to that school. But then we also have an itinerant pool that gets assigned through student services based on needs across the system. So we added 4 to that pool just in the last couple months through our budgeting. And so that number, so if you look at our number has gone up by 12.
I know, but that seems small.
I know.
Relative
but if
to
you
the
can also
entire
appreciate
board
that,
and the great need.
Yeah, if you can appreciate that Peel is 2.5 times our size.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you want to look at it as a percentage of increase, we're not far off. We
But
have
I know like a couple of principals that I've talked to have said that, we're really stretched with respect to EA support. There's not a lot of EA supplies that come in, so when they're not here, it's really tough. And a lot of kids that previously were being supported have significantly reduced.
Yeah.
Like for example, someone who had a 0.7 support is now getting a 0.2. And I know EAs that I've spoken to are feeling really, really burnt out because they have, maybe have 2 children on the spectrum in kindergarten, and now they're being asked to look after both. So I just know the need is so great, and I wonder if there are any surplus funds anywhere. This would definitely be a place that it could be put to good use.
Yeah, I appreciate the concern and the question. We're looking at that all the time. I'll say that, and we, when we look at it's hard to compare boards because, I communicate quite regularly with my colleagues across the GTA. I was on email with some of them today, and we've gathered information about, okay, so what's your enrollment and how many ESL teachers do you have and how many EAs and how many certs and how many self-contained classes. We've done all that. The challenge is it's not apples and apples in the comparison because you might say, well, how come you have more EAs than we do? Well, part of it is that, for example, when you compare public and Catholic, most public boards have more self-contained classes than the Catholic boards. So where they might have more EAs, they don't have those congregated settings, and so the students are all spread out, and therefore you need more EAs in that type of organization. So, and even if you go public to public, you say, well, how come Halton has more EAs per ratio by student? well, what are the other classes and programs that Peel Public offers? So that's, you know, it ends up being difficult to make that comparison.
For sure,
So
yeah. I think my purpose was not so much to compare the boards, because of course they're vastly different, but it was sort of to look at the fact that, you know, we know that the ministry has made significant cuts. Boards are struggling to sort of make ends meet and support students. And so I thought, well, that's a place, you know, I saw that and I thought, wow, that's amazing. I'm wondering if other boards are going to follow suit, given the cuts, and try to find, you know, it's making the best use of the money that boards have.
So I'll say that we monitor that all the time. And if through our staff, you know, they're constantly, our staff sort of out in the schools are bringing that information through Sean and the managers of PSSP staff to say, what are the needs out there and how best do we address them? So there have been years in the past where I've come to trustees and said, we really need some more EAs, and I've come with a request for 10 or 15 or whatever that number might have been. So that's happened some years it hasn't. I'll say that because it looked different in Peel than it did for us, as it did across all boards. You know, the budget cuts that all boards faced this past year were pretty significant coming into this year. I feel very fortunate for us as a system that, I don't know, I guess I'd be careful. I guess I'm cautious of this because no cuts are good, right? But as a system, as a proportion of where the cuts, the value of those cuts and where they were made, not many were made in special education. So we were almost status quo in all of our staffing levels. We had a few drops here and there, but not many. So those cuts were felt in many other areas of our organization, both in the corporate side within our administrative, but also, you know, we took some big cuts in library, for example. You know, a number of other areas we took some deep cuts. And so spec ed kind of went relatively unscathed. So I can't speak for Peel if they were the same, but that would be a factor in terms of looking at, okay, so what do we need now mid-year? And they may have been trying to pull themselves back to where they were before the cuts happened. There's just so many things that go into making it difficult to compare.
Just reminding you that EA shortages are happening. It's a reality in the ground.
Yeah. I appreciate hearing it here. I'll tell you, I hear it more loudly some other places. I will say that a challenge for many boards is the unfilled vacancies. So, right, a number of our we work hard. We typically don't have trouble hiring permanent staff. It's hiring occasional EAs. Part of it is the wage. Part of it is, you know, sort of the range of choices of places to work, right? You can live in Halton and work in Halton and Peel and Hamilton, and right? So we know a number of our supply EAs are on a number of supply lists. So, you know, we might say, wow, there's 500, I'm not sure the actual number, but let's say there's 500 EAs on our supply list. Why isn't that enough? It's because they've got work elsewhere, right? And so we don't have trouble hiring permanent. I don't think we do. We didn't. I'm not sure it's an issue right now. But we have difficulty in having those jobs filled each day of the vacancies. So Sean and I have heard many, many times over and over again from principals, if I just had all the EAs I'm supposed to have each day, we'd probably be okay. It's, you know, that's a significant part of the challenge, and it's not limited to Halton. This is a province-wide issue, and I don't want to say anything more in terms of, you know, there's contract negotiations going on and all that piece, so, you know, I don't want my comments being part of anything there. That's, you know, we don't control the money side at the school board level, right? That all happens provincially between, you know, you saw in my labor update, you know, those negotiations happen provincially when it comes to the financial piece.
Okay, moving on to 4.0, communication to SEAC, and the first person is back to you again. The superintendent's report. Once again.
You're sick of me at this point in the night. I get that. So I just can't find my report. Shoot. So the only, I have it. Oh, I know where it is. Sorry. Here we go. So shared with you around negotiations are ongoing. You know, we're all hoping there's going to be a deal tonight between the OSSTF, the Secondary Teachers Federation, and the boards in the province. If not, our secondary schools will be locked tomorrow, and students won't be attending because we can't supervise and support them. So we really don't want to see that happen. But once again, those negotiations are happening centrally. But there's going to be a significant impact in our elementary schools as well, because our secretaries, OCTU, our Office and Clerical and Technical Unit is the name of that bargaining unit, are also represented by the Secondary Teachers Federation. I'm pretty sure the Secondary Teachers Group represents more non-teachers than teachers. So in our board, they represent secondary teachers, also secretaries, also our PSSP staff. So, which is all of our, I think, I put the list in there for you. So in other boards, it might be caretakers. Like I know in some of boards, it's EAs. It might be ECEs, etc. So it really varies board to board. And that's why even when we had the potential CUPE strike a number of weeks ago, why did some boards say they're going to be closed and other boards say they're going to be open? Because it depended on which staff were represented and might potentially not be at work that day. So it does vary. So in our elementary schools tomorrow, if the walkout does happen, there will be no secretaries in those schools and no PSSP staff. So that's going to be, we've got secondary VPs planned to be deployed across all those schools to help with answering phones and buzzing the doors and all those things that we appreciate and value that our secretarial staff do. We need to have other folks doing that. I think Sean's at a school in Oakville tomorrow doing just that kind of support. So we make sure that our elementary schools are supported and safe places for our kids tomorrow. So we're hoping for a deal tonight and hoping that there's good news that schools are open tomorrow, but that may not be the case. So I won't say anything more than that, but I hope it's a bit of an eye-opener when I sit in here. There are 9 unionized groups in our board, and we have one deal so far with CUPE. So we have a number of negotiation processes to work through. And my other 2 items I'm trying to continue to highlight for you the kinds of learning that go on for our staff. So for you to see the kind of learning opportunities that were provided for our administrators last month, and then our EA PA Day. We had over 1,000 EAs between our permanent and our supply that participated. Great EA learning provided for them. So I highlight some of the topics that were there. I do have a short video, but I'm thinking at the time of the night, we'll hold off on that. So, yeah, it was an extra. You don't have to do it. And you want me to stop talking? I get that.
Thank you. The next committee is the Accessibility Coordinating Committee.
So given that we've had our presentation earlier today, we can move on to the next update. Thank you.
Parent involvement.
Oh, we jumped.
We jumped. Sorry.
Equity.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
4.2, association reports.
Yeah.
And I will be quick. Yeah, it's all right. Just for, very quickly, we have a lunch for the Learning Disabilities Association. We have a lunch and learn tomorrow. If anybody's free, they're welcome to come. We have launched tickets for our Learning Solutions for Learning conference in March. Tickets are now available online, and there are group discounts available for organisations that are able to get together a group of more than 10. And then Diane attended the Ontario Council for Exceptional Children conference this weekend. She was very complimentary about the presentation by Judy Sackville and Diana Lang, both HDSB personnel. And she wanted to offer congratulations to Christine Waresh, I hope I'm saying that correctly, life skills teacher at Sam Sherratt Public School, who was awarded the OCEC Teacher of the Year, Region 2.
So I was at the same conference and I saw Diana and Judy's presentation. It was fabulous. And I saw that teacher there and chatted with her for a while. I didn't know she was getting that award. Darn, I would have congratulated her. I didn't know that. But yeah.
Okay. Any more association reports? Okay. Then I'll move on to the trustees.
Okay, thank you. As we are into the 4th month of the school year, you can imagine things are very busy at HDSB. I'm just going to focus on 5 kind of highlight topics from the trustees' perspective or side of things. There's a number of boundary reviews underway. You probably are aware of that. The first one for Oakville and Burlington, focusing on area of Curtis Estates, has wrapped up, and there's a board report going to the Board of Trustees in tomorrow's package. The second boundary review is the Acton, Georgetown area, and that boundary review is currently underway. The Oakville, Palermo, Heritage Glen boundary change. There will be a parent information session next Thursday, December 12th, for the affected families, and communications have gone out, and councils of both schools have been informed. And finally, the Milton boundary review will be beginning in January. So at some point, trustees currently are or will shortly be involved in these boundary reviews. Second update, you are aware that multi-year planning is underway. Our external consultant, Maximum City, has conducted a number of focus groups and surveys, gaining feedback from a variety of stakeholders. So that's students, staff, parents, the larger community, and groups such as the Student Senate and our Gary Allen students, to name a few. So the steering committee met today, actually, and we received a kind of a high-level summary of what's been accomplished to date and some of the findings, and we're working through and communicate on how to communicate the results of those consultations in a public format sometime in the new year. Those findings will shape the conversations by the trustees and the senior admin in developing the multi-year plan for the next 4 years. So that work will continue for the next couple of months. Last Thursday, the PIC, which is the Parent Involvement Committee Steering Committee, held an orientation for all the PIC representatives from each of the HDSB schools. Many of the reps were there, along with many of the trustees. And the purpose of that was to inform any of the new PIC representatives about the role of the Parent Involvement Committee. Superintendent Podger-Barrick delivered a presentation on the HDSB Code of Conduct. So what do we expect of our students, and how do we build a safe, welcoming, inclusive school community? PIC reps and trustees were invited to discuss some of the themes represented in the code of conduct and kind of brainstorm about, how do we build a safe community? And those thoughts were shared with the superintendent for further consideration. And also there was a presentation on the Parent Reaching Out grant, because as you know, some changes have been made in the funding that's going to be provided to each of the schools. So the next meeting of the PIC reps will be in mid-February. The Bateman-Nelson Integration Committee held its second integration meeting at Bateman. It was led again by a great student voice with focus on the strengths that each school can bring to the amalgamation. And one of the main messages was the family feel of Bateman and the spirit at Nelson, which is a natural fit for working well together and building up upon each other's messages of better together. And finally, and this is probably one of the more exciting updates, is last Friday, HDSB held its second annual experiential learning event, which was the Halton Pathways Orientation. It was a full day of experiential learning for about 1,500 or all of our grade 10 students. It was held at the Velodrome in Milton. Students were given opportunities to explore the various high school specialist high skills majors or SHISM programs and to meet the teachers and employers related to each SHISM sector. So the event included more than 45 local businesses, provided full-day hands-on interactive activities for students. Colleges and universities that offer programming in those SHISM pathways were present there as well. So really a great opportunity for all of our grade 10 students to consider their pathways for the future as they plan their course selection for grade 11. And I believe that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. I actually attended the Equity and Inclusion Education Advisory Steering Committee with Diane, who isn't here this evening. So I will provide an update. I haven't done this before, so bear with me. We did talk that evening, which you saw in an email, about the student census, which they're doing a pilot run on. I'm not sure if it's going out or has gone out. Did it go out? I wasn't sure if that was happening with all the talks. It's not happening.
Yeah, not yet.
Not yet. Okay, the student census, which is collecting data, grades 4 to 12 being independent, kindergarten to 3 being parent. They're collecting quite a bit of data from the students. There was an email that went out this evening. Attached was a letter that went to parents as well. So the pilot, which was supposed to happen at the end of November into December, was happening in a few schools here in Oakville, and then next year it's supposed to roll out across Halton inclusive. It's a requirement, as you could see by the information that was sent out. It's a requirement by the ministry, so you can take a look at that this evening and educate yourself if you'd like. Any questions that you might have, you can maybe direct to Mark or the superintendent in charge of that as well. And as well, just so you know, we do have a human rights symposium this Thursday, December the 5th. It's a full day of learning.
Actually, it was canceled
okay,
due
then.
to the labor.
Due to the labor, all right
Yeah.
then. So my apologies.
Yeah.
There you go, that's been canceled. Okay.
Well, the labor situation, because we had a number of, with situations where staff can't be out of their school or can't participate, depending on where they're at. So, yeah, so we had to cancel for that reason. Yeah.
So, at this time, I'd like to adjourn the meeting.
Just a reminder that, so it's January 14th, right? We're not where we normally go the first Tuesday of the month. It's not because that's, I'm sorry, I forget which one, but it is a significant day of significance for one of our faith communities. So that's why it's not on that date. So it's on the 14th. And happy holidays to everybody. Enjoy time with your family and friends.
Okay, I had something that I